want us to think about it's about time. Not so much in the phrase as we usually use that phrase, like, well, it's about time. But instead, think of it in this term that life itself is basically about time. If we think about it, life on this side of heaven is limited and defined by time. We could argue that life is the spending and passing of time. And so we spend time, we pass time, we waste time, we make time, we share time, some of us even do time. Life is a series of decisions and experiences, all of which require time. That's why J.R.R. Tolkien said, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Now think on that for just a minute. He's not far off. All we have to do in life, all we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given us. As we begin a new year, we find this as the perfect opportunity to kind of evaluate life and discover that it's about time. With that in mind, look with me, if you will, in Ephesians chapter 5. We're in the book of Ephesians over in the New Testament. In Ephesians chapter 5, I want us to just look at a couple of verses this morning. Ephesians chapter 5, let's look together at verses 15 and 16. As we think about the reality, the importance, the value of time. He says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Now, when he starts right off the bat, he says, look carefully how you walk. He's not talking about walking. Often, when Paul uses the metaphor walk, he means how you live, how you walk through this world, in essence. And so he says in verse 15, look carefully then how you walk. What he's saying is, look at your life and how you're living it. Evaluate your life. Choose to live that life, to live their time carefully, purposefully, intentionally. He says, look carefully then how you walk. Pay attention to how you're living. And choose to live or spend your time intentionally. To be wise about it. You see, he brings up wisdom next. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. Make wise decisions about how you're spending your time or using your time, how you're living your life. One of the reasons that I wanted us to go here this morning is New Year. As the new year begins, many of us take this, it just kind of feels like a natural opportunity. Some of us call it resolutions. You know, we're gonna change some things this year. It kind of happens naturally for us. You and I both know that there's really nothing magical or mystical about starting a new calendar year, and yet it does seem to give us permission to do some evaluation and maybe start some of those resolutions and those changes. And so as we're thinking about these things anyway, I wanted you to see that Paul encourages us to choose wisely how we spend that time, how we live our lives. So I think Paul would kind of encourage us to, if you want to call it resolutions or reevaluation, or take some time to look at life and think about it so that we can be wise in the use of our time. He clarifies that even more in the next phrase. He says, look carefully then how you walk. We know that means to live carefully, not as unwise, but as wise. We want to be wise in how we use our time. Then look at 16, making the best use of the time. So he clarifies what he means very straightforwardly. He says, you only have a certain amount of time, so make the best of it. Use it for the best. And then there is that ominous phrase that he ends that verse 16, because the days are evil. Now, don't get too hung up on trying to figure out what he means by days being evil. In essence, he's simply saying that we live in a fallen world. And this fallen world has a time constraint. It's not going to be here forever. So as long as we're in this life, we live in a fallen world. Things are messed up, but it's not going to be this way forever. So make the most of the time. Look for the best opportunities, because there aren't very many. The days are evil. Things are messed up. So there aren't that many great opportunities. So look for them, watch for them, and make the best use of your time, he says in 16. So I want to see if I can help us to do that this morning. I want us to think about how we can make the best use of our time, how we can walk wisely and carefully through life. And the first thing that I think will help us with that is if we'll recognize the value of time. We want to recognize the value of time because there's not a whole lot of it. I think that Benjamin Franklin understood the value of time because he's the one that first said time is money. It is almost like a currency. We have to decide how to spend it, and we have to value it because there's not a whole lot of it. We understand the value of time. In Psalm 90 at verse 20, the psalmist is praying that God would help him see that value. He says, teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days. When I see, this is terrible imagery. When I hear him say number our days, you know what I picture? I picture Scrooge. In one of the versions, at least one, probably all the versions of the Christmas Carol. But at least in one of them, there is, in one of those opening scenes, he's got all those pennies or those little coins, whatever they are over there in that day. And he's counting each little one in stacks. And he moves this stack here, and then he counts this. And why is he doing that? We know he's not a good guy. But what he's doing is recognizing the value of the coins on his table. In a similar way, the psalmist says, teach me to number my days, to recognize each one as valuable. Teach me to see that there aren't that many. They have a number. The fact that they have a number means they're limited. And because they're limited, that makes them valuable. You know, Lisa collects these Precious Moments figurines. And when we buy one of those Precious Moments figurines, if as long as they're legit and you buy them from a legit dealer, on the bottom there's a little number. It'll say, 5,372 out of 600 made, or 6,000 made. Right. So you know how many were made, and you know which number yours is. That tells you kind of the value of the item. Days are numbered. Because they're numbered, they're limited, that means they're valuable. Stephen R. Covey probably was pretty close to right as well when he said the key is in not spending time but investing it. Recognizing the value of time. And in a similar vein then, we want to recognize the limit of time. One of the reasons that time is valuable is because it is limited. Have you ever noticed how quickly time seems to come and go? When we watch our kids grow up, one day I was walking Ashley from the parsonage to the elementary school to start her in kindergarten. And the next day I was walking her down the aisle for her wedding. A day and a half later, we were at the hospital when baby Collins was being born, who, by the way, was born at 10:42 that morning, 10:24, 10:24, the perfect time. Dr. Pepper people will understand. But how quickly time flies like that. Dr. Seuss, that great theologian, how did it get so late so soon? It's night before it's afternoon. December is here before it's June. My goodness, how the time has flown. How did it get so late so soon? It happens because time is limited. And so again, the psalmist, this time in Psalm 39 at verse 4, "O Lord, make me know my end and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am." I think that we would walk more carefully, to use Paul's phrase. I think that we would choose to do so more wisely, again, to use his verbiage, if we recognized that there's a limit to our lives. We're not here forever. We have a certain number of days. Thank God none of us know what that number is. But we're here for a limited time. And because our time is limited, we want to make the most out of the time that we know we have. What time do I know I have? Right now. There's a limit of time. And then I also think that we want to learn to understand the perception of time. We need to understand the value of time, the limit of time, and that leads us to recognizing the perception of time. What I mean by that is time is constant. There are always the same number of seconds in a minute. There are always the same number of minutes in an hour. There are the same number of hours in a day, the same number of days in a week, the same number of weeks in a month, same number of months in a year, same number of years in a decade, same number of decades in a century. None of that changes. It is constant. And yet, how we experience that passing of time does change, doesn't it? Sometimes time flies, sometimes time crawls. Some of you have heard me say this before, but time just crawls, even stands still at those middle school track meets. Oh, my loving daughter, whom I would die for without a question, ran whatever is the very first event in a track meet, and she ran whatever is the very last event. I had to be there the whole day. I've said it before, but I'm telling you, if somebody told me I had one day to live, I would choose to do it at a middle school track meet because those days last forever. But there are those times when you're with your friends, you're with your family, you're doing something exciting and fun, things are going well and God is blessing, and time goes like that. Hours pass and you say, well, we just got started. How is it over? Our perception changes in spite of the fact that time is constant. We experience time in three phases, don't we? We experience time as we think of it in terms of our past, our present, our future. We were just sharing with the kids, we measure those things by photo albums in the past and the clock in the present and a calendar for the future. We experience time in those ways. And because of that, Paul says to us in our primary text, be careful how you spend that time. And you want to be wise about it. You want to make the most of the time because there's not a whole lot left. So in order for us to be wise enough to make the best use of our time, we need a biblical perspective on that past, present, and future. In just the few minutes that I'm going to hold you, a few minutes we have remaining, let me just share with you a biblical perspective on past, present, and future. First, I would encourage us to honor the past, celebrate the present, and prepare for the future. Now, if you think of it in those terms, that can be applied to leadership in all kinds of areas. Cities need to think in terms of honoring our past, celebrating the present, and preparing for the future. School districts have to do this every day. Churches need to think in terms of honoring the past, celebrating the present, and preparing for the future. Families need to apply. Individuals, each one of us, can understand a biblical perspective on time when we learn to honor the past, celebrate the present, and prepare for the future. First, we honor the past. Isaiah chapter 46 at verse 9 teaches us to remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. This was said to the people of Israel while they were in Babylon, surrounded by pagans, worshiping all kinds of weird gods. And the Lord God, Yahweh, said to them, remember the former things. Remember who you were, who you are. Don't give in to the pressures of the world around you. I am God, not those other gods. I am God, and there is none like me. He said, don't forget what I brought you through. God delivered the people from Egypt, and He began them on a journey through the wilderness. And in that wilderness experience, He gave them the law. In that law, there are a set of feasts. The purpose of those feasts is to remind the people of their deliverance from Egypt. God set it up in a plan to say, don't forget, honor the past, remember what we've done together. When they got through that wilderness, it's time to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land. As they crossed the river, the water parted again. The second time they walked through parted water, and they picked up stones on the way across, a stone for each tribe. Once they got on the other side, they put those stones into a monument. And He said, now, when your children walk by this way, they'll say, what do those stones mean? And you tell them our story. Don't forget. Honor the past. And then Jesus, as He meets with His disciples, He fulfills the purpose of the Passover meal. The Passover meal said, don't forget how God delivered us from Egypt and how He saved us. Jesus now says, don't forget that I'm delivering you with a new covenant. And so He says to them, do this in remembrance of me. Honor the past. Remember how Jesus died for us. You jump forward to the book of Revelation, and John tells the church in Ephesus, remember your first love. We honor our past when we learn from it and grow because of it. Even that goat, Dr. Dillamond in Wicked, he said we cannot escape the past and we ignore it at our own peril. The past helps explain our present circumstances. Honor the past. And we do that best when we apply life's lessons to the present. But honoring the past does not mean that we let it have too much power over us. I personally struggle here. This is one of my weaknesses. Allowing the past to have too much power over me. What you and I need to learn to do is honor it by taking the lessons from it that we can apply to the present, but not allowing the past to hold us there, to grab us and to keep us from moving forward. We are not biblically free if we're stuck in the past or if we refuse to let go of it. So Paul said to the Philippians, brothers, I don't consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what is ahead, I press on. We learn from the past, but we don't let the past control us. That's how we honor the past. And then we learn to celebrate the present. And by that I simply mean find the things today that you can celebrate. Every day there's something that we can celebrate. Psalm 118 and verse 24 says, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." Now, most of us, the only time we ever heard that verse was in church, so most of us thought that verse was talking about Sunday. You know what day that verse is really talking about? Whatever day you read it. It's talking about today. This is the day the Lord has made. So let us rejoice and be glad in it. Celebrate the present. I know there are bad things going on. I know it. I feel it too. But I also know that every single day that we are alive, we can find something to be grateful for and something to celebrate. Celebrate the present. So Jesus emphasizes the importance of living in the now and celebrating what's happening right now when he said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient is the day, is its own trouble." In other words, today is today. There's enough to worry about today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Live in the now and learn to celebrate what God is doing even in the midst of troubles. We focus on God's purpose for today and find every reason to rejoice. And then finally, we prepare for the future. We honor the past, celebrate the present, and prepare for the future. The Proverbs is that place of wisdom that guides us so well. You'll see there in Proverbs 21, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." If we just let life happen, life's going to happen to us. Instead, we plan, we prepare, we move forward on purpose. Again, in the book of Proverbs, we read in 16, "Commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established." That's the best way to prepare for the future. Commit your work to the Lord. Lord, my life is now yours. You do your thing in me, through me, and you do it for your glory. We learn from Paul that we want to make the most of our time. We do that by understanding the value of time, the limit of time, and the perception of time. As we perceive time, then, we learn to honor the past, celebrate the present, and prepare for the future. When we do those things, we wind up saying, "God, you're bigger than me. You're in charge. I'm not bound by the clock, the calendar, or my past, but I commit it all to you. You make my life what you want it to be. I surrender who I am. I surrender my time. I surrender my all to you." Father God, help us to do that very thing today, that we might live carefully, that we might make the best use of our time by surrendering it to you, by committing to you who we are. That does not come naturally and it doesn't happen automatically, so Lord, today help us to choose it, to decide it. That you're the Lord, that means you're the boss, you're the master. And today we surrender to you. We ask that you'd help us to make that more than words and experience that in our walk with you. in Jesus' name.